ایران ای مرز پرگوهر، ای خاک از سرچشمه هنر، دور از تو اندیشه بدان، آینده مانی تو جاودان.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of this series on modern Iran. Today we're looking at Pahlavi Iran, the Demon Khan, the rise of Reza Khan and the Pahlavi dynasty. And once again I am joined by my wonderful friend Hunger the Dye Merchant. How are you, Hunger?
I'm doing well. As we mentioned before the start of the stream, this is a very timely stream given recent events, but I myself am doing well, and I'm excited to actually get into the Pahlavis finally.
No, certainly. And I think we should start by addressing the title. Why have I gone with this title, the Demon Khan? Well, there is actually a reasonably good justification. So where this comes from is that in Persian mythology, if you read the Shahnameh, there is this evil figure called Zahak, who is essentially the personification of evil, and Zahak is acclaimed to have been the son of Ahriman, who is the evil deity in the dualism of Zoroastrianism. So you have the good Ahura Mazda and then the evil Ahriman. So you can almost say that Zahak in the ways like the Persian equivalent of the son of Satan. And in the Shahnameh, the sort of Iran's mythical ruler Jamshid, who loses his divine grace, loses his Kavana, is usurped and overthrown by Zahak, who then is sort of squatting on the throne as this evil demonic tyrant, and he reigns as king for about 1,000 years before he's overthrown by the warrior Feyredun, and the world is set to rights again. And so you can almost see this is like a parallel of this in the Pahlavi dynasty, where Reza Khan is as a Haq figure who's come in, he's deposed the Qajar dynasty, and is sort of presiding over this sort of tyranny, if you like, before he's right. The Pahlavis are righteously overthrown in the Iranian Revolution. That's certainly one interpretation you could make of it. What's your thoughts on that comparison?
No, I don't disagree. There's also the poem that we're going to be talking about later in the stream. A lot of that mythology comes from the mountainous region that is north of Tehran, and these are very high mountains. I believe they're like over 3,000-4,000 meters tall, and they're white capped, and white capped from the snow and the cold. And this is he's kind of referred to as like the white demon from the north, which is not inaccurate given the Iranian mythology and the references that the poet makes to Pahlavi.
I know, certainly. Thank you. Okay, so in this stream, we'll be looking at the early years of Reza Khan's domination of Iran's politics, from the February 1921 coup d'etat until his proclamation as Shah in December 1925. And so, just to recap, Iran has just come out of this post-World War I period where the country was under foreign occupation, and it's now finally got some breathing spaces. Both the British and Russians have withdrawn, and now Reza Khan sort of coming in as his military strongman to sort of modernize and renovate the country, but there is a very steep opposition to him. And so after this coup, it's very much like a two-man sort of system here, because this is a portrait of the leaders of the coup. So on the center left, kind of in the middle, you've got this figure with the sort of the cane here, called Syed Zia. So he was a journalist. So he was sort of the political leader of this coup, and he becomes the prime minister for about 100 days before he's deposed. But then we've got Reza Khan there on the far left. And so Syed Zia is the prime minister. Reza Khan is the commander-in-chief of the army and also minister of war. And he's really the one who's calling the shots here. But he's got this pretense of this sort of intellect and journalist, as like giving a kind of civilian sort of sheen to his regime, if you will. And so as a result of this coup, so it started by the police are forced to surrender. The army Cossack division takes occupation of the Maidan-i-Mashq, or the drill square in Tehran. And over the next 3 months, several Qajar statesmen and notables are rounded up, about 500 in total. Ahmad Shah caves the pressure and appoints, obviously, Syed Zia and Reza Shah to their respective positions. And what's noteworthy is that Syed Zia was not of the old Qajar elites. This is the first time during the entire Qajar era that somebody not of this background was appointed. So this in itself was quite a notable act. And both Syed Zia and Reza Khan, they both published 2 communiques that are released to sort of announce their statement of intent of what they intend to do. So Zia promises a program of reform that is backed by army, including like land reform, rebuilding the economy and finances, as well as asserting the country as a sovereign independent state. There is a kind of lip service to British friendship, though they formally condemn the former Anglo-Persian agreement, which was proposed in the last stream we talked about, but ended up falling through due to Britain's inability to properly secure Iran's frontiers. And the communique that's issued by Reza just declares himself commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Is there anything you want to come in off the back of that, or?
No, I think yes. Sayed Zia and Reza Khan, in and of themselves, are pretty interesting figures. Sayed Zia was actually a cleric. That's where he gets the title of Sayyid from. Sayyid is like a honorific for certain clerics. So Sayed Zia was educated, had a religious education. He was a cleric, but he was a very modernist. He was very modernist in the sense that he chose not to wear clerical robes, and he became more of a journalist than an actual, imam or religious figure. As a journalist, he had his own newspaper, which is called the Rad. Rad is the Persian word for thunder, and it was very illustrative of his rhetorical style. He was a very charismatic guy, a very eloquent writer, and he had a very impassioned populist program for reform. He very much hated the Qajar elites and nobility and the landowners. And as a populist, he was a modern reformer, but not in the same way that Reza Khan would end up being. And Reza Khan, I think, well, if no one has watched your stream with Apostolic Majesty, they really should, because you also go into the background of Reza Khan there, in that he was basically, a peasant for most of his life. His uncle was a soldier in the Cossack division. His mother was from Mazandaran, but he was a nobody. He came from a very poor family, or he came from a very poor military family. And like I said, his uncle is who got him into the Cossack division, which was headed by those Russian officers before the Soviet Union was founded. And he very much rises through the ranks. He's very tall. He's also very charismatic, but he is a ruthless officer and bureaucrat, I guess, for lack of a better term. But that's what I have to say just briefly on those 2 figures.
And no, certainly, thank you. And just going on from this point, I mentioned this sort of lip service to the friendship with Britain. So what's also interesting is the relations with the Soviet Union are normalized around this time with a treaty of friendship that's signed literally less than a week after the coup. So again, you're seeing a return to Iran as a buffer position between the British and the Russians, now the Soviets. And the treaty includes the renunciation of all previous Persian concessions and would last until the revolution in 1979. However, there was one notable exception, and so just to quote Article 6 from this treaty, if a third party should attempt to carry out a policy of usurpation by means of armed intervention in Persia, or if such power should desire to use Persian territory as a base of operation against Russia, and if the Persian government should not be able to put a stop to such menace, Russia shall have the right to advance her troops into the Persian interior for the purpose of carrying out the military operation necessary for its defiance. And so you can see there, this is essentially like a clause where the Soviet Union has the right to militarily occupy Iran if Iran presents itself as a threat to the Soviet security and interests, which is something they would exploit about 20 years later, as I think we all would come to know.
Yeah, that would come back to bite them in World War II. But I think we should mention one thing that's important to the context of the coup, which with the coup of February 1921, which is how involved or not involved the British were, because there's actually like some debate on this. I tend to think that the British were quite heavily involved. Amanat might disagree with that, but would you like to go into more detail on the British involvement in this coup? Because there is some genuine debate about how much did they know, how much did they support it, and the differences that were going on in the Foreign Office.
Well, last time I mentioned the figure of Edmund Ironside, who was the commander of the North Persian Force. Well, he is the one who empowers Reza Khan by making him the commander-in-chief of the Cossack division. So ultimately, if you're going to, you could say Britain is indirectly to blame for this, because had Edmund Ironside not done that, then it's less likely that this coup would have been successful or even been attempted had Reza Khan not had that power and prestige from that support. So that's one element. It should be noted that Lord Curzon, who was the Foreign Secretary at the time and who was the architect of the Anglo-Persian Agreement in 1919, he was furious with this coup and with Reza Khan sort of taking over, because we mustn't forget that Curzon was, as a young man, visited Iran. He writes his 2-volume Persia and the Persian Question. He was someone who was very interested in Iran and saw Iran being in Britain's sphere of influence as important. And so he sees Reza Khan as a threat, because he sees, oh, we don't want this military strongman coming in because he might make Iran too independent and drift away from our influence. And perhaps even more of a notable concern is that he's someone who might be strong enough to perhaps nationalize or militarily secure Iran's oil away from our own control and our national interests. So certainly that element as well.
No, absolutely. And in the case of Sayed Zia, Sayed Zia is a complicated person because he was very much pro-British. He became much less pro-British later on in life. But Sayed Zia was actually one of the very few journalists in Iran at that time that supported the 1919 Anglo Agreement, which was not popular at all, despite his other very populist views. He was actually much more pro-British than Reza Khan actually was.
And one other point, there's a chap called Norman who is the British envoy in Iran, and he supports Reza Khan and recognizes his coup. And I think it's believed that he had knowledge of what was going to happen, and he's actually recalled, and his diplomatic career is over after this because Curzon was so furious with him. So I think it's fair to say that the British Foreign Office very much did not support this, but figures on the ground, as I said, like Edmund Ironside and like Norman, were the ones who very much enabled this to happen. So you can almost say you've got generals and diplomats on the ground going rogue, so to speak.
Yeah, pretty much.
And now we've talked about the coup and the initial sort of diplomatic relationship that's being established. I want to now come to how does Reza Khan solidify his position, because as I mentioned, Zia's tenureship as prime minister only lasts 100 days, and then you have a series of other kind of figurehead prime ministers, while Reza Khan still maintains commander-in-chief, and then in 1923 he actually takes the office of prime minister for himself. So I'm just going to read a section from the Modern Iran book by Amanat. So Reza Khan as the commander-in-chief. If Said Zia's time would soon pass, Reza Khan's would not. His rise between 1921 and 1925, culminating in his ascent to the throne and the founding of the Pahlavi dynasty, brought to power a new military elite, co-opted some Qajar notables but marginalized the rest, crushed the Jangal movement and the other centers of autonomy and secession, bulldozed through a state-sponsored program of secular reforms, and pacified the countryside with ruthless efficiency. It was as if a surgical knife had lanced an infested cyst that had long troubled Iran's body politic. At the outset, the measures implemented by the new strongman of Iran were welcomed by nationalists and left-leaning Democrats alike, but once the autocratic nature of his regime became more apparent, support began to evaporate. Reza Khan and his close circles showed little hesitation to force into silence these independent political and religious voices as long as they could secure the backing of the growing class of professionals, modernist intellectuals, and even the generation of mullahs who exchanged their clerical garb and turban in exchange for European attire. These new sectors laid the foundation for the secular middle class that would form the backbone of Pahlavi Iran. Resolute and calculative, Reza Khan, by then known by his new military title, Sardar-e-Sepa, or Chief of the Army, proved a quick study and shrewd maneuver. Given the cold shoulder to Syed Zia from the start, even though at times they appeared to be in the same camp, within a year he consolidated his hold over the Cossack division and its officer corps, some of whom were senior to him, and merged it with the Iranian gendarmerie, the police, and Iran's regular troops. 2 months after the coup, when he assumed the position of Minister of War, he was widely recognized as Iran's savior and treated accordingly. Reza Khan was a figure reminiscent of Nadir in 1732, when he elevated himself to the position of Safavid regent. Ahmad Shah was not yet completely ostracized, nor was Reza Khan the absolute master of the political stage, but these grounds were well prepared for the rise of a new autocracy. Syed Zia's political fall happened as fast as his meteoric rise. Once he had aroused enough resentment among the Qajar elite and lost both the confidence of the British and his usefulness to Reza Khan, he was forced into exile in Palestine under British mandate, where he would remain for 2 decades. Iran's new master soon realised that collaboration with select members of the Qajar elite and landed aristocracy was more advantageous than working with a rabble-rousing journalist, tarnished by his close association with the British. Soon he began to see the merits of having on his side the likes of Ahmed Kavam al-Sultaneh, Vusuk al-Dawla's younger brother, Hassan Moshe al-Dawla, and Hassan Mostalfi al-Mamalek, members of the old guard who were popular with the intelligentsia. The situation on the ground also helped lift Reza Khan's stature. The withdrawal of the British Norper force in May 1921 coincided with Bolshevik disengagement from the Jangal movement and a subsequent withdrawal of the Red Army from Gilan. The rapid end to military occupation 3 years after the end of the war in turn created a power vacuum. For one, the British envoy in Tehran and his superiors acknowledged that Britain was no longer wielded the kind of military presence that could dictate its wishes to the rising Reza Khan, whom Norman had characterised as a peasant upstart. It seems as though overnight British prestige had suffered a setback. Yet Reza Khan's ascendancy was not achieved without serious domestic challenges. A senior gendarme officer in Khorasan, Colonel Mohammad Taqi Khan, better known as Pesian, staged what eventually turned into a full-scale revolt against Tehran. A Germanophile romantic, Pesian, had earlier served as Kermanshah military commander during the provisional government in exile before escaping to Berlin. After his return as military commander of Khorasan in February 1921, he was instrumental in the arrest of Kavam al-Sultaneh, which brought him the blessing of a handful of Mashhad notables and the loyalty of subordinate gendarme officers. Wary of Reza Khan's rapid rise, he chose to resist a merger with the Cossack division, and upon Kavam's appointment to the premiership, the colonel, resentful of a return to elite politics, resisted disarmament. In October 1921, he died in clashes with government forces, and the Khorasan rebellion collapsed soon thereafter. Throughout mid-1921, Reza Khan and his troops also scored a final victory against the Jangal movement, the greatest challenge to the Tehran government after the withdrawal of Soviet forces. The divided Jangal movement rapidly disintegrated. Even mediation by the legendary revolutionary Haider Khan and Muluglu could not heal the ideological and personal divisions. After his exile from Iran in 1910, Haider Khan had spent several years in Europe, including Germany, and during the war years he organised a socialist brigade to fight the Allies alongside the Young Turks in northern Iraq. The Bolshevik Revolution boosted Haidar's morale. Close to Russian revolutionaries and known to Lenin, he was dispatched by the Bolsheviks first to Central Asia to fight against the Russian Whites. In the mid-1920s, during the famous Baku Congress, he won the leadership of the Iranian-dominated Adalat Party that had been initiated in 1916. In mid-1921, after the coup in Tehran, he moved from Baku to Gilan to mediate between the Jangal's rival factions. Esenullah Khan and his fighters from the Caucasus opted to first fight it out against government forces, but under pressure from the newly appointed Soviet representative in Tehran, Fyodor Rothstein, who was anxious to normalise relations with the Iranian central government, they later were forced to leave for Baku with the evacuating Bolsheviks. In Esenullah's absence, Haider Khan saw an opportunity to fill the gap, possibly with Rostein's support. He persuaded Kuchak Khan in August 1921 to appoint him as Commissar of Foreign Affairs for the Gilan Soviet Republic. Soon after, however, Kuchak Khan's supporters assassinated Haider Khan. In October 1921, because of suspicions that he favoured Soviet conciliation towards Tehran, from his beginnings as a socialist agitator in 1907 to his time as a mediator in the forests of Gilan, Haider Khan left behind a legacy of violent radicalism and of often futile agitation that had since been glamorized by generations of Iranians on the left. Esenola's end was no less tragic. He spent the rest of his life in Baku, where he reportedly was arrested in 1937 and killed in one of Stalin's purges. Haydar's fall anticipated the final collapse of the Jangol movement. With Reza Khan himself leading the troops to recapture Rasht, Kuchak Khan retreated back into the forests. Once his war commissar, leader of a Kurdish affiliate of the Jangol movement, surrendered to Reza Khan, Kuchak and a small band of loyal disciples took to the high mountains of the Hal region west of the Caspian. In October 1921, Kuchak Khan and a German junior officer and friend who had remained loyal to him through the years died of exposure, perhaps trying to reach Russian Azerbaijan. The defeat of the Jangol movement signified the end of a socialist anti-imperialist tendency in Iran. Rooted in the constitutional revolution, the Jangol movement thrived in its aftermath but lost out to a centralizing state that relied on a superior military and aimed to implement a secular state-building project. In January 1922, when another gendarme officer, Abul Qasim Lahuti, a socialist revolutionary poet, rose in rebellion and briefly captured Tabriz, he was quickly besieged and forced to defect to the Soviet Union. Lahuti's attempt was fueled by secessionist tendencies in Iranian Azerbaijan. Less than 2 years earlier, an urban uprising led by clergyman Mohammad Kiabani, another Azerbaijani nationalist with socialist leanings, had been put down by the Governor-General Mardi Koli Khan Haydayat Mukhbar al-Sultana. Kiabani also died under suspicious circumstances. Contrary to Azerbaijan's Iran-centered nationalism throughout the constitutional period, and despite the fact that Azerbaijanis acted as the engine for that revolution, both the Kiabani and Lahuti revolt pointed at an emerging ethnic resentment, which would pan out in a generation during the post-World War II Azerbaijan secessionist crisis. There was no question that Azerbaijan had a distinct ethno-linguistic identity, and the Persian-centric nationalism dictated from Tehran did not go over well with Azerbaijanis or other Turkish-speaking populations who constituted perhaps a quarter of Iran's population. Yet one cannot ignore such ideological threads that tied these sentiments to pan-Turkism of the Young Turks era and later to the Bolshevik-inspired propaganda of Soviet Azerbaijan. Reza Khan's military not only curtailed the Jangol movement and wiped out the nationalist Islamic idealism embedded in it, but also crushed nearly all sources of tribal resistance to the centralizing state. There were repeated crackdowns between 1921 and 31 on the Kurds in the northwest, Boya Ahmed and the other Mamasani tribes of the Luristan province, the Shah Seven of Azerbaijan, the Kashkai Zafars, and the Bakhtiaris of Isfahan, employing heavy weaponry as well as air bombardment. The notorious Western Division of the reorganized Iranian army, headed by Reza Khan's senior officers, pummeled the lightly armed tribal forces. Soon after victory over the Jangol, the Iranian army raided the rebellious chief of the Kurdish Shakak tribe, Ismail Aka Simku, who had long wreaked havoc in western Azerbaijan, looting Christian villages and killing the inhabitants. With the blessing of the retreating Ottoman army, in 1918, Simku massacred several hundred Assyrians and committed other atrocities. He wished to unite into a Kurdish republic, the Kurdish tribes on both sides of the Iran-Ottoman border, though he had never truly succeeded crossing over the line from bandit to political leader. In the summer of 1922, Iranian forces drove Simku across the Ottoman border and captured his fortress in Cherik in the Salmas region. The pro-Reza Khan press celebrated his defeat of the Shahak as a major victory, although it took another 8 years of clashes before Simku would die in skirmishes with the Iranian army. Insurrections aside, major sources of resistance in tribal regions were against the state's relentless tax collection and various forms of extortion by army officers. Moreover, the weakening of Iran's political centre, especially since the start of World War I, had encouraged regional autonomy along the periphery, which at times benefited from real or potential economic opportunities. Later on, the state's policy to make nomadic communities sedentary, profoundly disrupted to the nomadic way of life, triggered revolts. For Tehran, as for any other modern centralizing state, nomads were a potential threat, for they constituted a population difficult to control, especially if armed and in command of their terrain. The amalgamated armed forces, further consolidated by the merger of the South Persian Rifles in September 1921, were reorganized into 4 divisions, with central command firmly in Reza Khan's hands. Taking advantage of the prolonged martial law that had been in place since the beginning of the coup, a small group of army officers, perhaps no more than 24, became masters of the country, ruling with impunity as military governors over provinces and cities. In their new uniforms, shiny red boots, rimmed caps, and fancy accoutrements, they instilled in the heart of ordinary Iranians fear and hatred, but also admiration. For many officers, a violent demeanour and disdain towards the general public was considered natural and necessary. Peasants, nomads, and urbanites had to pay tribute to officers with flattery, cash, and gifts, or else faced grave repercussions, appropriation of landed property, summary executions, cruel public punishments, and severe beatings of civilians and troops were accepted norms of this military culture. A facade of discipline and efficiency held by officers of all ranks were complemented by military pride and loyalty to the new commander-in-chief. The military became a new money class with an appetite for luxury, leisure, and promiscuity. The funds for military modernization, recruitment, and campaigns were secured by appropriating indirect taxes and state income from the Crown lands. Reza Khan attached both departments to the Ministry of War. Soon, a large chunk of the back payments from the country share of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, nearly £1 billion, negotiated earlier by Fusuk al-Dawla, was also appropriated. This shot in the arm made military expenditures the largest item in the budget and a burden for still ailing state finances. Attempts by statesmen like Mohammad Mossadegh al-Sultan, then Minister of Finance in Kavam al-Sultan's first cabinet, to negotiate a fair budgetary deal with Reza Khan ended in frustrating deadlocks, and Mossadegh resigned in protest in January 1922. It was apparent that the Qajar statesman had lost to the military upstart. Yeah, so as we can see there, Reza Khan is able to brutally centralize and destroy all rebellions and tribal opposition, and essentially complete this sort of military autocracy, if you like. And just to draw more comparisons to Nader Shah, who Reza lionized, if we remember, after the fall of the Safavids, Nader Shah comes in to initially prop up the Safavids, and he defeats all these foreign invaders, so the Afghans, the Ottomans, and the Russians. But then he himself, from this entrenched, strengthened position, is then able to depose both Tahmasp II and then the child Ismail III, and before declaring himself Shah, and then crushing more ethnic and tribal resentments within Iran to fully solidify his position. And so, again, the comparisons are really profound, aren't they?
Oh, yes. And the comparisons to the autocracy. They were both very, very autocratic figures and ruthless. Amanat talks about this quite a bit, and how not just that Reza Khan was like personally ruthless and scheming, but the new military class that was being installed, that was gaining prominence in the state, was very brutal and mistreated people quite badly. There was a bread riot, I believe, like a year or two later, after the coup that Reza orchestrates, where like these people are protesting bread shortages, and the military and police just like viciously put them down, and like dozens are killed in this very simple, very popular protest over food shortages.
No, exactly, because you're starting to get this broad coalition of opposition to Reza Khan. So this is including middle-ranking clergy, merchants, intellectuals, and journalists, and even some of the older Qajar elite who had lost out due to the coup. And the chief leader of the opposition was Prince Mohammed Hassan Mirza. So he was the Qajar prince. He was the younger brother of Ahmad Shah, and who had actually gone into exile at this point. Reza Khan, by this point, has been alluded to in that passage from Amanat, had the support of both the British and Soviet resident ministers, so Percy Lorraine and Theodore Rothstein, respectively. And it's because they see him as a strong leader that could maintain Iran as a buffer state, because the last thing either side wants is they don't want Iran to collapse into anarchy and chaos again, lest they both have to intervene and get involved. And so what Reza Khan does next is quite interesting, because there's threats and opposition to him. He says, well, if you won't support me as the commander-in-chief of the army, I will resign as Minister of War, and then I'll let the country lapse into chaos again. But the Majles end up pleading for him to return. So he quits, is then reinstated, but the army budget is reined in somewhat to curb excesses as a compromise. And then he spends the next... Oh, sorry, carry on.
No, please continue.
Yes, and then from there, he then spends the next year gathering support before he's able to force himself in as Prime Minister in October 1923, where he promises to do more than just act as a military leader. So the fifth Majles is opened on the pretext of reform and a form of regime change, whereby this is a prospective idea that this Majles, with the support of Reza Khan, is going to abolish the Qajar monarchy and declare Iran a republic. And this is, again, not helped by the fact that the Shah is in exile. so the sentiment is as well. It's almost going to appear to be a fait accompli that if the Shah can't be bothered to stay here and defend his throne, then we might as well go with the wishes of this this sort of quote unquote secular nationalist tyrant who's come in. And however, this vote in the Majlis to declare a republic ultimately fails, and the reason it fails is that it is not supported by most of the clergy. And so on screen here, I've got two prominent clergymen. So on the left, I've got Hassan Modarres, and on the right, I've got Abdel Karim Hayri. So Modarres was a reformist cleric. He'd been one of the supporters of the constitutional revolution, and he is the main leader of opposition to Reza Khan amongst the clergy. And because ultimately, again, he thinks declaring a republic is going too far, because again, there's an implication that a republic is naturally going to be secular, therefore the interests and the prominent position of the clergy within society is going to be diminished, and if not, perhaps completely eradicated, because a concern is that obviously around the same time, it's 1924, what's happened over in Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk has declared the Turkish Republic a secular republican regime. The Ottoman monarchy is not only abolished, but Ataturk also abolishes the caliphate. And so even though Reza Khan had not formally announced any intentions to do any of this, the comparisons between him and Ataturk are enough that the clergy are terrified that he's going to be a Persian Ataturk. And so what happened is Hayri, who was a Grand Ayatollah, himself and two other prominent clerics, Abdul Hassan Isfahani and Muhammad Hassan Naini, they conclude a secret meeting at Qum with Reza Khan. And we don't know the contents of this meeting, but we do know that after this meeting, Reza Khan comes out and appears to change his tune somewhat. He comes out saying, "Oh, religion is important for the country. I think secularism is bad." So if you're reading between the lines, these clerics said to him, "Look, we have concerns that your government is too radical and too secular. If you were to essentially make yourself the Shah, we would support your position." And you may ask the question, why do they do this? Well, ultimately, it's because the Iranian monarchy is very theocratic in nature. It's always presides itself on this alliance between the monarchy and the clergy as the two pillars of the state. And so by forcing Reza Khan to become Shah, I believe the mullahs believed that they were kind of binding him to some sort of religious obligation and sort of unwritten treaty, if you like. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, this was pretty much the best course of action for, I guess, the opposition and the opposition and the more pro Qajar elements of the society. Binding Reza Khan to the Shah, to being a Shah, was pretty much the best course of action, because again, he was a very popular. Well, I mean, he was unpopular for his cruelty, but he was very popular being the savior of the nation and putting down all of these secessionist movements and successfully buffering both the Soviets and the Brits. In that sense, he was popular. He was a national hero in that sense. So his rise to, the dictator of Persia was inevitable in many, many regards. And what the opposition, as you just said, tried to do is kind of bind him to the more conservative institutions of the state, like the mullahs and like being the Shah. And I get the reference to what was happening in the Republic of Turkey, the former Ottoman Empire, was very, very prescient and was on everyone's mind, because no one doubted Reza Khan would have done the same exact thing. I don't doubt that for a second. It was very much in vogue at the time and very popular among the secular intellectuals of Tehran, just across the board in the Muslim world. This was just a very popular idea of like secularism and abolishing these old failing institutions. It would have absolutely happened in Iran if the conservative establishment was as weak as it was in the Ottoman Empire, but it was not. Like the mullahs still retained quite a bit of institutional institutional power in Persia, whereas in the Ottomans it just completely collapsed.
Yeah, that's interesting because just to try and draw a comparison, I very much agree because ultimately, in the Ottoman Empire, the clergy and religious establishment, I think, were very much bound up with the ruling elite, and due to the failures of the Young Turks, I think when Ataturk comes in, it's much more radical. It's completely revolutionary. The old order was almost entirely swept away, whereas in Iran, I think the old order came off looking better because ultimately, remember, you've got this reformist clergy, such as people like Madares, and the two glowing stars during the Constitutional Revolution. Behbahani. I'm sorry, I forget the name of the other one, but the clergy. That's it. Thank you. Yes, and so because you've got these reformist clergy who are prepared to institute some kind of political reform, or as long as it's reform that is guided by Islamic principles, it is halal and not haram, so to speak, if we're going to use an Islamic expression.
Yeah, the Shia clerics were much more open to reform than the Sunni, religious establishment in the Caliphate and the Ottomans. Like, this is kind of a tradition in Shia Islam. Like, they are not as orthodox as the Sunni clerics are. If you want to use that kind of language.
Well, I would need to read more about the clerical establishment in the Ottoman Empire because for most of my reading,
reformist in a political sense, yeah.
No, certainly, because for most of my reading of the Ottoman Empire during this period and in the very late years, the clergy hardly come up at all. It's all about the monarchy, the Ottoman dynasty, or the Young Turks. The clergy don't really get a mention, so it might actually be something interesting to research and see the sort of history of the Ottoman clergy in the later years to maybe a better answer this question.
It was also that, just going off the top of my head, just from what I know about the Ottomans, because the Sultan was the Caliph, the Shah was not exactly, that was not like a parallel thing with Shia Islam. Like in Shia Islam, the Shah was not the same as the Caliph because you have the hidden Imam of the age. This is like a totally different parallel. These are not the same things. Like the Sultan was the leader of Sunni Islam, and therefore he was the head cleric, whereas the Shah was not the head cleric. And there was an institution of, scholarship with the mullahs. Yeah, so it was like there was more of a separation of church and state because these were two pillars, not one pillar. In the Ottoman Empire, it was one pillar, whereas in Persia, they were two pillars: the monarchy and the mullahs.
Well, just to draw back to some older themes in this series, I was talking about this with AM on that stream he had me on for, but ultimately, what is the modern Persian monarchy? It kind of goes from under Ismail being a kind of a pseudo Shia imamate to being, a Persian kingdom, doesn't it? And ultimately, what I see is the monarch, or their title, the idea of Zer Allah, the shadow of God. The Persian monarch is the patron of the clergy, and if you like, so of course they're going to champion the Shah because the Shah is going to act in their best interest more than the Caliph of Sunni Islam is.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And if anyone has not watched your stream with Apostolic Majesty, they absolutely should.
I know, certainly. Right. Okay. Yep. So ultimately, Reza Khan's now got all the support from the clergy. One thing I should also address is the opposition to Reza Khan from more, shall we say, liberal intellectual circles, because some of these people were split. Some of them did support him because he promised to be a modernizer who was going to, reform the economy, industrialize the country, and, westernize the country, so to speak. But some of them were against him because a lot of these people were open to the legacy of the Constitutional Revolution. So they either wanted a constitutional monarchy or a kind of, quote, democratic republic or parliamentary system. And so what's interesting is that a lot of these liberal types who were pro-constitutional revolution were actually opposed to the declaration of a republic. Because if you think about it, under the current system, which is a constitutional monarchy, the Shah is weak, and so these liberal parliamentarian types actually have more authority and influence over the system than if a secular republic is declared that's nominally a military dictatorship headed by Reza Khan, where he's just going to have them all shot if they oppose him. So in a way, they're kind of acting in their own interest, aren't they?
Oh, of course. I mean, many of them did support Reza Khan in his rise to power, but very quickly soured on him once his more autocratic side started to show. These were liberals first before they were reformers.
No, certainly. And so in terms of these more sort of liberal or intellectual critics, one particular one was a gentleman called Muhammad Taqi Bahar. And this is where we're going to come back to the concept of the Demon Khan again. So he was a Persian poet and literary scholar. So he was originally a supporter of Reza Khan, but towards the 1924, he completely comes out and turns against him. And so I'm just going to read another section from Mamanat. So in July 1924, the minority in the Majles, headed by Madaras and supported by, among others, the poet and Majles deputy Muhammad Taqi Bahar, held a vote of no confidence in the government on the grounds of the unconstitutionality of Reza Khan's conduct in office, disrespect for the Majles, mistreatment of citizens, and financial misappropriation. Yet their manoeuvre was defeated by a vast margin. In a short period, the climate had dramatically changed against Madaras and his supporters. Fearing intimidation, physical attacks, and threats to their life from agents of Reza Khan's police and their hired thugs, members of the dwindling minority did not feel safe even taking their seats in the Majles. Bahar, who early had welcomed the rise of Reza Khan but soon became one of his eloquent critics, expressed the mixed feelings that intellectuals of the period reserved for the emerging dictator. And one of his masterpieces, Damavandir, on Damavand, also known as the Enchained White Demon, composed in 1922, he calls on the highest summit of the Alborz range, Mount Damavand, overlooking Tehran, to burst open on the Iranian capital and destroy its sinful inhabitants. Once an active volcano, Damavand is the center of Iran's mythological geography in the Shahnameh. Bahar writes, "O Damavand, the enchained white demon, the dome of the world, you, the heavy fist of time, untouched by the passage of time, rise to the heavens and blow on the land of Re a few times. From the fire of the oppressed and the flame of divine punishment, send clouds over the land of Re, rain fear, war, and terror, like fire and brimstone that blow Sodom to oblivion, like the city of Pompeii that Vulcan brought to instant death. Destroy the pillars of this deceit, tore apart this race and this kinship, take the revenge of the wise from these ignoble idiots." Calling on the enchained white demon is an obvious double entendre, for it is an allusion not only to the volcano's white cap, but also to the white demon killed by Rostam and the 7 trials he undertook in Mazandaran. The white demon can be taken as an allusion to the Jangal movement and the Bolshevik support for it that was eventually brought to an end by Reza Khan. That is all the more plausible, since the mythical Damavand also holds inside the tyrant Zahak of the Shahnameh, who usurped Jamshid's throne and ruled over Iran for a millennium before the hero-savior Feyruddin eternally chained him on Mount Damavand. It is as though here Bahar was making a second reference to Reza Khan, who was turned into a tyrant. Moreover, in Bahar's poem, Damavand is portrayed as the dome of the Gitti, the Iranian mythological goddess of the fast-revolving terrestrial universe with fatalistic potency. She nurtures, then destroys humans and civilizations. The reincarnated Zahak, therefore, is destined by the fortune of the Gitti to make his climb to absolute power before an inevitable fall. The volcanic task that the poet thus invites Damavand to perform is to destroy the old Qajar order and whatever is associated with it, just as Zahak was invited to overthrow Jamshid's once glorious but fast decaying kingdom. Despite its apparent pessimism, Bahar's complex imagery makes sense only if the unleashed Zahak of Damavand is to be seen as the lesser of the two evils, but one that is also destined for eventual destruction. Late in October 1925, on the eve of the abolition of the Qajar dynasty, Bahar's criticism of Reza Khan almost cost him his life. In a case of mistaken identity, the plainclothes henchman of the new regime assassinated in front of the Majles an unfortunate person who resembled Bahar. The other deputies got the message. Landing in Reza Shah's jail a few years later, Bahar got the message. He gave up politics and became a renowned professor of Persian literature in Tehran University. One of the 20th century's greatest students of Persian culture, he was far from the revolutionary fire of his youth, though not devoid of the modern values that shaped his generation. Yeah, so as we can see, what an absolute banger of a poem. And all that says to me is I have to wonder if Bahar is the common ancestor of the Iranian diaspora.
See, it does seem that way. I think that, as we discussed, before the stream started, the Iranian diaspora do feel very differently about the Pahlavis. I'm not sure how they feel about Reza, because Reza was a very complicated figure at the time. But the liberalism and poetry is definitely there in the diaspora.
Oh no, absolutely, and but it's just also interesting, isn't it? Again, this idea of Reza Khan as necessary evil. It's almost like it's a kind of historical dialectic. For Iran to progress, they have to progress from destroying an old, corrupt, blighted dynasty with a tyrant who will clear the way of the old order in that some kind of Carlylean revolutionary cleansing fire that will then rule for a time and then be deposed by a return to a much more righteous ruling order.
Indeed, the parallels are many, and I think many of those liberals, once we get to the revolution, which we will get to probably in a few episodes, will be unhappy with the result of their liberation from the Pahlavis.
It's also interesting if we're talking about the idea of Zahak, again, the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the former supreme leader, many critics of his actually called him Zahak. So again, there's almost this idea that the Iranian Revolution, it's almost like the cycle repeats itself again, but this time Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was the Jamshid, and Ayatollah Khamenei is another Zahak figure.
Yeah, in the Persian culture, you can't really destroy the mythological narratives. For however secular many of these people were, like, the mythological narratives will always be there, and there is, not to talk too much about today, there is very much a narrative mythological battle going on of which side is Zahak and which side is the righteous. But I think that's a topic for another day.
Well, all I have to say is I wish both sides called each other Zahak than called each other fascists, as they're currently doing.
Yeah, that's our fault. That's a very 21st century unfortunate thing. Many people, the deracination of these cultures, very, very sad.
Very, very garbs are there. Right. Okay. And so with that, Reza Khan is able to finally solidify his position through one final incident known as the Imbri affair, or the Sakakana incident in July 1924. So what happens is Robert Imbri, who was the US consul in Tehran, was beaten up and stabbed to death by thugs for taking a picture of a sacred fountain in Tehran, because this fountain is very important, and I think and very sacred. And so by him trying to take pictures of it, many people of religious persuasion were offended, and so they stabbed and beat him to death in the streets. And there's debate over whether this incident was set up by Reza Khan, as he, in the aftermath of this, he declares martial law and in reaction arrests many of his critics.
If I could just briefly add one thing, it's actually the very tragic death of Robert Imbri is a little more complicated than that. I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, like an infidel, someone who is non-Muslim, taking pictures of a Islamic holy site did come off as very insulting and did cause like a scandal. But the nature of his death was actually much worse, because he was beaten in the middle of the street, him and another American colleague. Imbri is actually a very interesting figure. Just to give you a little bit more background on him, he obviously worked for the American consulate in Tehran. He was also a freelance journalist, and the reason he was at that specific Shia holy site was because he was doing a report for National Geographic, which still exists today, which every American is aware of National Geographic. And this is all the way back in 1924. So he's doing this report. He gets beaten in the middle of the street. He actually flees with his American colleague. They end up in a government hospital. And it's disputed of who exactly these people were, but some people blame the Bakhtiari tribes. The Bakhtiari tribe, so members of the Bakhtiari clan, stormed the hospital, entered his room, and stabbed him to death in the middle of his surgery. that is the added context for the very tragic death of Robert Embrey.
Iranians not cause diplomatic incidents or violence challenge impossible.
There's many such cases. You have to have one every century at the least.
It feels like every half century at this point.
Indeed.
Yeah, so obviously this happens, and he launches this martial law and arrests many of his critics. And considering the violence, I also have to wonder whether, because they're folks, I wonder if there maybe were looties of a mullah, perhaps, who was aligned with Reza Khan, if we're going to be that more conspiratorial.
It's left for debate. I think Amanat, while giving plenty of context, I think he could be a bit more decisive. I don't know. I feel like at times how do I say it? This is just my personal criticism of Amanat. Not to say that the context isn't important, and not to say like we'll never know in some cases. We'll never know. But I think Amanat is very selective in when he tells the reader he is absolutely sure who's behind it, and when he's not sure, he's very wishy-washy.
Yeah, no, that's certainly fair. But what's also interesting is after this, again, another reason you could say Reza Khan's done this is to kind of publicly present like a new religiousness, because again, by cracking down, it is to show that he cares about religious matters. And because what also happens after this is that the month later, on August 1924, he takes part in the Sham-e-Karaban, or the Night of the Bereaved, which is a procession during the month of the Muharram. And
Ashura.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The Ashura is the very Shia holy day where it's honoring, well, maybe not honoring is the right word, but mourning the death of, the descendants of Muhammad, Ali, and Hassan, sorry, not Ali, the descendants of Ali, Hassan, and Hussein at their death in Kabbalah.
No, it was only Hussein who died at Kabbalah.
Right.
Hassan just basically says after that set wasn't there, but he says, "Okay, I quit. I won't claim the caliphate," and then he dies in exile. So,
correct, but they are mourning the death of. They do consider them martyrs, especially Hassan. But that's a little intricate for the Shia holy days. It is a day of mourning for the Shia holy calendar, and as you mentioned before, Reza Khan, kind of abandons his secular tendencies because he has to gain the favor of the mullahs, and so he's doing all these processions and participating in these holy days to give off the impression that like I'm not going to counteract the mullahs, and I'm going to be a wise, Islamic ruler to pacify these people, even though he's always been a secularist at heart.
Yeah, it's very much phoning it in, sort of lip service. But from there, the press, who are becoming very loyal to Reza Khan, start to again make further comparisons to him as like a new Nader Shah, because what's interesting is you start to see this sort of cult of veneration for Nader Shah under the Pahlavi, sort of retroactively seeing Nader Shah as a kind of secular national hero of Iran, even though I think that's somewhat inappropriate, because the press also compare Reza Khan to the Achaemenid dynasty of the founders of the Persian Empire, and as we know with the name, Reza Khan would adopt the surname Pahlavi, which was the name of the old pre-Islamic Persian script. So again, almost like taking a leaf out of history to legitimate his sort of newfound dynasty. And the press also demonized the Qajars as foreigners for their Turco-Mongol links, even though it's weird they do that when they also lionize Nader Shah, where I would argue Nader Shah was more of a Turco-Mongol warlord than he ever was a secular nationalist.
No, indeed, and yeah, I mean the Pahlavi. I think you did mention this on the AM stream, where it's like this is basically the Windsors. This is a marketing scheme to graft this this very lower class family onto like the historical tradition of Persian society and culture. Am I getting that right? I mean, the Windsors might be a slightly different case.
Well, the Windsors are at least of royal blood. Well, at least the older past members of the dynasty are, because Prince William, the Prince of Wales, has married a commoner. It now means that all of the former royal patrimony and future kings and queens are going to have be less blue-blooded. So, but ultimately, the point he was alluding to was the fact that the actual name of the dynasty was the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, because Queen Victoria, the last of the Hanovers, marries Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and obviously the dynasties pass patrilineally through the male line, and so you have their son Edward the Seventh, who was so according to the royal dynasties, he's technically the only king of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, because his own son George V would then rename the dynasty from Saxe-Coburg Gotha because it was too Germanic during World War One to Windsor to sort of anglicize it.
Yeah, I mean, I think David Starkey talked about this. It was basically a marketing scheme, and I think Reza Khan was very much copying that kind of strategy of like a marketing scheme to seem more, natively Persian than he actually was. Which is not to say that Reza Khan was not Persian, but his original family name, which I believe was Pahlavi, was actually Persian for like a cattle rider, which again was a very much a very low class profession, which he did not want to continue to be seen as.
No, certainly not. No, but it should also be remembered that I believe his father was actually of Georgian ancestry, so he wasn't even a full-blooded ethnic, sort of ethnic Iranian technically. So
just another Caucasian upstart. Many such cases.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and so, well, obviously I mentioned the adoption of the name. So the background for this was that the Magyars passes a new law banning titles in 1925, and so because people may have noticed throughout the names of several people throughout the series that a lot of the names include the title. So, for example, if you're a Shah, you're Shah. So, for example, Reza Shah, and Khan, Reza Khan, changing from when before he's the Shah and after he's the Shah. You've also got Mirza or Prince, such as Abbas Mirza, and so because typically you would have like a given name, and your last name would just be whatever your title was. So you kind of have this very radical revolutionary act of banning all these old titles, and now the law just says that everybody has a first name, and you need to then adopt a new last name. And so it's in the context of this law is why Reza Khan adopts the name Pahlavi.
Pre-Reza Khan, this was very much the custom. Like these names we've mentioned throughout the series, like Mirza, like Khan, these are not family names. They don't come from the same lineage. And that was like you said, that was abolished by the Mejlis in 1925. This is pretty much one of the most radical, most modern reforms that's undertaken at this time. There are going to be others as we get deeper into the series, but there was not much resistance to this. It was kind of like, we're going to have a national registry. Everyone picks a family name, and this kind of like I don't know, causes a little bit of chaos because people start picking different names. The same way we have, Smith and I don't know, Potter as like family names. It's like, okay, whatever my name is now, whatever my profession is, whatever region I'm from, like Mazandarani, like Tehrani, like I'm going to be, this is my new family name. And it does cause a little bit of chaos, but that's the obvious consequence of that.
No, certainly. And it should also be noted that because the Ottoman Empire, Ataturk did this as well in Turkey, because there was, as pointed out by John, not real name in the chat, Enver Pasha, again, Pasha's a title, so all those old titles in the Ottoman Empire were also abolished. And, Mustafa Kemal, obviously, is eventually given his new name of Ataturk by the Turkish parliament. So, yeah, again, very similar vibes going on. And in terms of finishing and coming to an end of this stream, the last thing before he becomes Shah Reza Khan consolidates his position by militarily occupying Khuzestan and crushing the local Banu Kab and Banu Taf tribes, because for those who don't know, Khuzestan had always maintained a level of autonomy from the central government because of the domination of the tribes of this region. And what's really interesting seeing is with Reza Khan is you see almost adoption of a new name for the country, because the concept of the guarded domains is dropped and the new title of the Dawlat Aliyeh Iran, or the sublime or imperial state of Iran, is adopted. So again, there is very much foreshadowing that this new regime is going to be much more centralized and less provincial.
Yeah, and as we mentioned before, and I believe in our last stream, Khuzestan is an incredibly important region for Iran because it is where all the oil fields are, or the majority of the oil fields are in Iran. This was very much not just under the control of the local tribes, but very much under the control of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, APOC. So the British had already reached an agreement with these tribes in Persia of like, we'll have some revenue sharing from the sales of these oils. You'll get a couple kickbacks. We take whatever we want, and provide security and all this stuff for the region. Did you have anything to say about that? There is one more thing, that this region was, majority Arab speaking, although it was also a stronghold for the Bakhtiaris, because I think it was quite close to Isfahan. Khuzestan is the border region between Iraq and the Shas al-Arab, which is the swampland of southern Mesopotamia and Isfahan, all the way to the east.
No, certainly, and what Reza Khan's doing here, not only is he centralizing his control, but he's also ensuring that the British have to rely on him for protection of the facilities at Abadan, and also allowing him the potential that if they get on his bad side, he will just march in and nationalize it.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he's strengthening his control and the negotiating position. And so that's pretty much the end of the stream. And next time we will delve into his reign as Shah in more depth and look at some of his the economic modernization and his political and societal reforms. So is there anything you wanted to say before we wrapped up and I read any super chats?
Not really. I think you've been following the current events a little more closely than I am. I'm quite burned out on geopolitics at the current moments. But is there anything like I think we should briefly, for a few minutes at least, talk about modern or current events that are going on right now?
Yeah, well, since we last spoke, it's been confirmed that Ali Khamenei was killed and he's been replaced by his son, Mojtaba Khamenei. So all Donald Trump has done is replace Ayatollah Khamenei with another Ayatollah Khamenei.
Replacing the Taliban with the Taliban.
Exactly. But what's also interesting is, some people are joking, saying that, the Iranian monarchy is back. There's a new Khamenei dynasty. And, well, this is less of an aberration than people think, because, in Shia Islam, there is this tradition of dynastic theocracy. I mean, you see it in the concept of the imamate, where it's, Ali, then Hassan and Hussein, and then all his descendants all the way down to the 12th Imam. We see it in the Fatimid Caliphate. We see it in the Nizaris Mailis or the Order of Assassins, and even under the the Safavid Sufi Sheikh order, and with Ismail and his father Haydar. This is a common thread throughout Shia Islam. This sort of a dynastic Shiite theocracy. So I don't think it's entirely out of place.
No, I mean not at all. I mean, if the history of the Shahs is anything to go by, and of all the Shahs since the Safavids, I mean, the Shiites don't have a problem with primogeniture the way Sunnis do, and this goes all the way back to the descendants of Ali, who is a relative of Muhammad. This is very much not a problem for Shiites the way it is for Sunnis.
No, certainly not, because in Sunni Islam, it's more the most ideal choice is one who is, I think, of the right sort of religious education and character, and there's less of a focus
it's also
on
in Sunni Islam, it's also the oldest male of the family, not exactly from father to son. So it could be an uncle, could be a cousin. Like, you can have dynastic rule, but what's given precedence is like the most senior male of the family or of the tribe.
It's a John, not real name. It is, but rather there's a disdain for primogeniture, or the idea that the title should pass from father to son linearly. It should instead pass horizontally, so brother to brother or cousin to cousin. So just to give you an example, this is actually what caused the second fitna, because the first of the dynastic Umayyads, Muawiyah, passes on the caliphate to his son Yazid, and that's what leads to the uprising of the Aliyid or Shiite faction. And as a way of kind of restoring order, Abdul Malik, who was a later Umayyad caliph, after militarily defeating the other factions, he sets out a succession plan where he says, right, I will pass on the caliphate to my eldest son. However, his heir is going to be my next son, and it will pass horizontally. And what ended up happening after his death is the next 5 caliphs were horizontal succession. So it went brother to brother, then cousin to cousin, then back to brother again. So it ended up being 4 sons of Abdul Malik ended up becoming caliph, because he realized that you had to have a horizontal succession to better maintain stability. And also there was a tendency that if you just do father to son, well, if your son is a bit of a shithead, then you're kind of buggered. Whereas if you do
Yes,
this horizontal succession, you're more likely to get somebody who's older and more experienced.
yes. So it is dynastic, but it is not primogeniture in the sense that we see it.
Exactly. Well, if you don't mind, I want to go to the super chats if you've got nothing else to say.
Yeah, let's continue.
Yeah, so we have 10 Australian dollars from Dissident Knight. Penance for leaving our host high and dry for being Australian and therefore living in the future. Well, that's all right, Dissident Knight, and you can't help living down under, but thank you for your super chat. That's the only one I've had on YouTube. Have I had any come through on Entropy?
Penance in the form of super chats is always appreciated. It is the number one form of penance. Some might say.
Indeed. Yeah, we've had no others on Entropy. Well, thank you everybody for watching. So next time, as I said, we'll delve more into the actual course of the reign of Reza Shah, his reforms of the economy and society. We're not sure when that will be. It'll probably be in a couple of weeks' time, but me and Hunger will organise that behind the scenes, and I'll announce it closer to the time. But thank you everybody for watching, and have a good rest of your Saturday.